Okay, let's get started. So, welcome to the Embodying Your Design open house from mental guidance to somatic experience. And this is a course that Teresa and I are really excited about. It's the course that we wish that we had to really properly equip us for the experiment and get us off to a strong start. So, that's really what this is all about. So, I've been teaching analysts the depths of the system and how to holistically work with a chart over the past several years. And many of you actually have worked with me previously and seen how I work with the chart and the power of a holistic analysis. So I've gone to the depths and now I'm coming back to the surface. And Teresa and I have asked ourselves, well, what would have been helpful to know up front? What did we have to learn the hard way or figure out for ourselves? I feel like my starter pack, it was so random. They gave me like a stick of chewing gum and a 9 iron and like just random things for my journey that just didn't make any sense. Some silly putty, a slinky, and I'm like, what was all this? This didn't help at all. So we want to make sure that we give you the right map, the right guidance, the right experience to really take the experiment on and save you a lot of the time and the hassles and the pains that we went on in our own journey. So, of course, the answer for all beginners is always strategy and authority, right? But it can really be clarified. It's almost universally presented in a very vague way. But we also want to teach you PHS, primary health system, right? Is that's more than just how you're designed to eat. It's also an important part of your inner GPS. We're going to be talking about that a little bit more shortly, as well as what's called cognition, your super sense that you're meant to rely on. It's happening unconsciously, right? And so some people believe that, well, your cognition, the super sense, is really only available to you years after you've been deconditioning. That's actually not true. So I rectify charts for absolute beginners, partly based on their cognition. Yes, it's true that it does strengthen as you follow your PHS, but it's still there. And it's a really important intelligence to bring into your awareness because you can actually rely on your cognition more frequently, more readily than strategy and authority. You're going to find as you go into this that strategy and authority don't take care of everything, right? They're very important, but they don't address everything. We're also going to talk about what human design really is pointing to, which is this shift from being seven-centered to nine-centered beings. And what does that really mean? And in parallel with this learning about your design, Teresa will be guiding you into somatic explorations so that you can actually discover these signposts in your own body and life experience. All right, and you can start to help regulate and support your nervous system to foster greater embodiment and trust with your design. So largely today, we're going to be talking about a lot of misunderstandings that Teresa and I wish that we understood up front. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about the nature of the human design experiment. So the paradox is that it's actually not about decision making. With the signpost that this system uniquely provides, it's about decision watching. We're really unburdening the mind, or what human design calls the personality, from that responsibility of decision making. We're beginning to recognize the impersonality of our decisions, right? Impersonal to us, right? Even that I we identify with. So think about it. You've got plans with a friend and the friend can't make it. Rather than being upset about that, you realize that they're helpless in that process too. It's not that they chose to not be available. They're in a state where, for one reason or another, they're not available. So it opens up a lot of tolerance, a lot of acceptance, and a lot of compassion, both for ourselves and for the other. Right? So the word watching is really important here. But conscious engagement with our body, what's going on in our body, is a really important part of the decision making process. After all, we're passengers in a form. We're witness consciousness moving in space. And the act of witnessing naturally and gradually fosters alignment. See, what you're going to find is that awareness is alchemical. Right, this is an ancient spiritual teaching, right? Don't the Buddhists say, it's the seeing that really brings about the change? However, there is often confusion with seeing. We start interpreting and making associations with what we're seeing, right? Mental associations. This reminds me of that, and that reminds me of this. And then we lose sight of what's in front of our eyes. We lose sight of reality. Those conditioned interpretations create a filter between you and what it is that you're witnessing. You're not actually seeing what's there. You're seeing a concept of what's there. And that's the Maya. That's this world of illusions. So human design is helping us see something new, a new dimension of reality, right? The mechanics of our life and experience. And it's true. All systems can either illuminate reality or condition you to see it in a particular way. That's the binary. Now, here's the thing. In past lives and other spiritual modalities that I work with, it was all this philosophical stuff that really was becoming a filter, this thick filter from which I was seeing life and interacting. And that wasn't helpful. It was keeping me more in my mind. But the beauty of the human design mechanics is that you can just start to discover, just gently notice the signpost in your life. The practice itself is about gently noticing. Oh, look, there you go. There are 2-4. Of course, there they are hermiting, right? It's not a philosophical filter. It's actually giving you things to notice, right? About why, about what's happening and why. So again, the experiment is about seeing, and seeing is really the catalyst for transformation. But seeing clearly is conditional on safety in the body. It's conditional on a regulated nervous system. And no, of course, no one's nervous system is always meant to be regulated. But we're a society of people with chronically dysregulated nervous systems. Again, the decisions of your life need to be witnessed, but this simple task is quite difficult in a traumatized world where many people don't feel safe in their body. They've been educated to make decisions from their mind, right? Therefore, they aren't really settled into their body. They're not really at home there. They're not able to be present enough with their body to allow it to inform them, to recognize what its truth is. And of course, when triggered and acting out a trauma response, our minds are screaming even louder, making it that much more difficult to hear the body's truth. So simply stated, trauma makes it very difficult to take on the experiment. You can have all the right information about your design, but it's just information until you discover it in your body and life experience. So let's take a step back. What do we mean when we say trauma? Trauma is a loop. Trauma is a loop. It's an unresolved past experience stuck in the cells. It's any situation or event that's so big, so intense, that your body can't handle it. It can't metabolize it. So it disconnects. And trauma can come from so many things. It's not to be defined by the event, right? You can't say, well, that happened and that's a trauma, because some people can handle that particular experience and other people can't. Right? You also don't want to dismiss people's trauma and say, well, that's not big enough. I've been through worse. It depends. It's all relative to that person's design and their life experience. So each body has the capacity to metabolize sensation. But when something big happens, well, it makes a lot of sensation. It can overwhelm and inhibit the metabolization process. When you can metabolize the experience, well, it's just a stressful event that gets digested. But when you can't metabolize the experience, for whatever reason, it becomes a traumatic event. It goes from stress to trauma. And that means it gets stored in you. That's how it becomes a loop. So what your body wanted to do in the midst of the event, to scream, to run, to shake it out, all that energy gets compressed in you, right? And then you unknowingly live from that place. and it can become a default state under certain conditions. It can become your posture, I mean, quite literally, until it can be processed. So, nervous system capacity is what is required to metabolize stress. But so much affects our capacity. And capacity isn't a mindset, right? This era of mindset coaching is over. Sure, there's still people trying to sell that. There's still people falling for it. It doesn't work because trauma is untouched by attitude. Trauma is untouched by rational advice. Capacity is the ability of the body to metabolize the stressful experience. Capacity is what we want to work with here. The 7 to 9 centered switch is bottom up rather than top down. What do I mean? It's you get down to the bottom of what is really behind, what is really below your thinking right now. Oh, you want to change your experience? You want to set an intention? You want to improve your life and you think you know what that looks like? What's going on in your body below that right now? Can you meet that? Can you be with that? That's transformative. Not this philosophical striving to achieve some better conceptual notion of who you think you're supposed to be. It doesn't work. Let's think about the mind-body relationship. What human design is revealing is that we're these two consciousnesses, the personality, right, and the design, right? So they are separate, but they're interconnected. The mind, of course, is our subjectivity. It's our interiority, dependent on and correlated with the form. But I see mind and body as having a symbiotic relationship with each other. And strategy and authority actually nurtures that symbiotic relationship. Ra calls strategy and authority a shotgun wedding. The reluctant union of these two consciousnesses, these two alien beings. But the thing is that the mind shows up in the body, right? The body is the platform for consciousness. The mind is a part of the passenger in the back seat, along with witness consciousness itself. Whereas the body is what's physically in space. It experiences life through the senses and through our cognition and through what's called our internal determination, our PHS. The mind is seemingly limitless. There's no rules, it's etheric. You can imagine something and you can go there in your mind. But that limitless capacity is a gift and a curse, right? Because the mind can wander from present embodied reality. And that comes in handy sometimes, but it also presents a dilemma. We can lose touch with the body when we're so focused on what the mind wants, and then we don't notice how that's impacting the body. So it's important to notice, where does your mind go? Especially when you realize you're acting out a pattern. Just noticing the pattern starts to disrupt the pattern. And it's helpful to inquire, well, what holds that pattern in place? What's the mental state? What's the story? What's the sensation that we can't be with? It's so uncomfortable, it sends us up into our mind, and then we defend against it. Or what's the absence of sensation? What's the numbness? Where are we frozen out from an aspect of ourselves? So again, awareness starts to unwind the stuckness in the form. Notice how your body feels with where your mind goes. And remember that relating to the body is different than understanding the body biologically or understanding the design. Relating is somatic. It's about getting curious about what's happening right now in your body. It's about this capacity called interoception, the ability to sense into the body's internal state. And your body's actually talking to you throughout the day. It's not about just getting embodied for a half an hour when you do yoga in the morning. It's about making this a way of life where you're able to tune into what your body is communicating the entirety of your waking day. So mental understanding is trying to figure it out and know why such and such is happening. And that's great, but that's very different than somatic experiencing. So I'm inviting you into a perspective shift here, not just about the human design experiment and how that experiment really works, but also about what catalyzes healing and transformation. See, we think we have to heal our trauma, and that's a task, but really all we have to do is witness it, and the body processes all of it. The body does the healing. The passenger just needs to witness the body to catalyze the process. Because you see, what makes an event traumatic, at least partly, is the disconnect. It's the disconnect between the passenger and the design, the mind and the body, or I should say, or the disconnect from another human being. Because the data shows that trauma partly occurs when we feel alone in the experience. And then the passenger feels confused and victimized by the experience. So this is what we're addressing. All right, think about that patient-therapist relationship and the fact that numerous studies show that it's the relationship itself that heals. It's the listening that heals, the witnessing. When you're there with a compassionate witness, they're anchoring you to your experience through that witnessing. I've heard it called witness. So it's great to have a witness there with us, but that's not all we need because, we don't spend our whole life in a therapist office. We're always surrounded by compassionate friends. So our task is to cultivate a compassionate witness with ourselves. So somatics, which I've personally greatly benefited from and am a very big advocate of, is about creating a relationship with the body. When you know how to witness your own sensations, where you store things, memories, experiences, sensations, and you become a compassionate witness to a place in your body, and then that place in you naturally starts to open up. It starts unfolding and speaking to you. The history there can gradually surface. The needs that it's trying to communicate start to become apparent. So what's really happening in this dynamic? Well, this is where self-regulation becomes a form of co-regulation between mind and body. Self-regulation is always co-regulation because we're these two consciousnesses, because of the inherent juxtaposition that is our existence, personality and design. We are this awareness, this passenger relating with two different beings, facilitating a bridge between them. It's like these two parts of us need to see each other and relate in a sense. So somatic experiencing creates a marriage between these two aspects of ourselves, these two beings, these two consciousnesses, design and personality, as they see each other, recognizing each other's role. As the mind, aka personality, learns its place as the passenger, as it learns to trust the body's innate intelligence. And in that, there's a sense of being anchored and belonging in your body. Right? Otherwise, you're looking for someone outside of you to heal what's inside of you. And that's just not sustainable. Now, of course, people can do that for you sometimes, and that's great. But it's also important to learn to hold that for ourselves. So this is the yoga of our binary consciousness. The passenger witnessing the design, witnessing the body's process, right? And the body's connection to a larger trajectory that we're choiceless in. Ross says the body graph is the fulfillment of the totality seeking balance, a perfect duality, two life forms that will emerge out of the same matrix. So let's dive into some misunderstandings. And here's a little orientation. There are a lot of ungrounded theories circulating in the human design field that would be very easily dispelled simply via patient observation. So that's the takeaway here. Give it time for the truth of the matter to reveal itself. We're all in a hurry. There are people saying there's no such thing as your aura type, for example, and that's just a really premature conclusion. So give it time. There's no rush. Whatever you're meant to do with this information for your personal benefit and or for your profession, it doesn't need to be chased. Right? Whatever is meant to happen will happen in its own timing. You don't want it to happen in your ego, your mind ego timing. That won't serve you. And before we dive in, I'm a 5-1. I'm a heretic with 8 fifth lines, which is quite significant. But let me tell you that heresies are really just common sense. I'm not a genius. I'm just observant. I'm tuned into what's common sense. There's something that the fifth line can see because of its unique relationship with conditioning. What do I mean by that? Well, to get a little in the weeds for a moment, Ross says the fifth line in the hexagram, it reflects how society sees that hexagram, right? The nature of the hexagram, the essence of the hexagram is actually the first line. But the world's perception of that hexagram is the fifth line. It's not the truth of the matter. It's what people think. So when you're a fifth line child, you're indoctrinated with the social expectations and mores of that culture. You can really develop a very intense superego because of that. All the shoulds, the rights and the wrongs. I've got to live up to all this. Children with fifth line profiles have a lot of unreasonable expectations put upon them. But with any luck, that fifth line person eventually sees that conditioning for what it is. Can everyone please mute? So with any luck, that fifth line person can see that conditioning for what it is and then wants to find what's real, what's true. Because the fifth line's here to be practical, right? If you look at the color level, it's about probabilities. It's about what's realistic. It's about what can you actually fix. And you know what? It's often the simple thing that everyone is ignoring. It's something everyone is guarded against. But it really is simple. It's just that there can be an incentive not to see certain things, especially in awareness paths. It's one of the paradoxes, right? When you're in an awareness path, whether it's human design, whether it's Buddhism, whatever it might be, there's both the most grounded, sane people and the most delusional and misguided. It goes hand in hand. That's the binary of things. Everything's always like that. And awareness paths are governed by Neptune, right? This planet of awakening or delusion. So the fifth line has been indoctrinated into the hopes and the expectations of the world. And it gives the fifth line a unique vantage point on what common sense the collective is overlooking to its detriment. The fifth line is very objective to. This is what the world thinks. Who am I in that? And therein the heretic is born, pointing out the common sense, which is often all that's needed to really fix the situation. Nothing complicated, just common sense. So you might not have heard of some or all of what I'm about to share with you today, but I ask you to give it your time and attention. and see for yourself. And you might need to sit on it for quite a while after this class is over. So the first thing to realize is the human design experiment can bring you more into your body or more into your mind. You know, it's knowledge that's meant to end the reign of the mind. Right? It's this bridge between the ajna's understanding and the new solar plexus spirit awareness that's just emerging on the planet that you can hear in things like the telepathy tapes, which is a popular podcast, right? Where they're looking at autistic children that are telepathic. And there's now extraordinary and overwhelming data confirming that this is happening. These seem to be proto raves. They seem to be the beginning of the mutation. But you see, whether you end up more in your mind or your body depends on how you relate with it. Because this is the ultimate candy store for the mind. There's so many answers here. How many of you have become almost obsessed or addicted to reading the PDFs that circulate the internet and or listening to Ra every day or whatever, right? Human design has so many demonstrable, practical, grounded, irrefutable answers. And even after 11 years in this experiment, I'm still having important revelations about how I operate. But there seems to be a misconception that knowledge equals deconditioning. And my mentor, Kamud Kabir, who is a student of Ra's, said that people generally stopped coming for human design coaching sessions after so much of the information was distributed for free. So a coaching session is distinct from a reading. It's where you really meet what's arising in the present moment, right? And the chart is there and you refer to it as much as you need to. But she said that stopped happening because now that the information was out there, people seem to think that they have it. But in my experience, most of us need some guidance. We need support applying and integrating what we're learning. Or just because we read a few sentences in a PDF doesn't mean that we've really enabled it to move us, to change us, to deeply affect us. Those few words strung together could be life-changing if you know how to work with them. And that's why I worked with her for 100 hours over 5 years. Otherwise, it just gets stuck on the mental plane and nothing really becomes real purely from the mental plane, right? It takes personal experience to bring these keynotes alive and to wake up ourselves. So what I recommend to people who are interested in learning the system and not just exploring it for their personal life is learn as far as you're genuinely interested in bringing it into your life. Right? If you're not genuinely interested in considering your dreams, don't study the dream aspect of the system. Why would you do it? Once you're ready, once you're deeply curious about that aspect of your life, then the knowledge goes beyond theory. And then you'll have your own observations and examples and stories to share with clients. So the first heresy here is mental interpretation actually does have a role in most inner authorities. So we talk about the body making decisions, and we talk about the passenger surrendering to the vehicle, i.e. the body. But there are actually only 3 inner authorities that are truly separate from the mind and its interpretive process. And that's, of course, separate only relatively speaking. But we could call these 3 inner authorities relatively objective rather than interpretive. And those 3 are 1, sacral authority, 2, splenic authority, and 3, a combination of those 2, which is called splenic generated authority. You see, in these 3 authorities, the task is to simply surrender to the somatic indicator, whether that's your sacral response, however you track that, whether that's a splenic intuition or instinct. So think about it. Once you know what your response is or how your spleen communicates with you, you don't need to process that. You don't need to interpret that. Once you know what it is, once it signals, you move with it spontaneously. But that's not the case with the other authorities. For example, the emotional person has to both feel into their body as well as mentally consider the implications of the decision to then see how their body feels in regard to that. And we know this both from years of practice, but also because when you truly understand the system and the wheel, all of the emotional gates are in the quarter of initiation, purpose fulfilled through mind. It's the first quarter of the wheel that's about the mind being initiated by what? By emotional chemistry and by the nervous system. As Ross says, the mind is the gas of the brain. What you're thinking is relative to what's going on in your body, which is why we're directing you to what's going on in your body. As your awareness goes into what's going on in your body, the thoughts will shift. So there is more of a complex relationship between mind and body with all of these other authorities, such as self-projected authority, or ego authority, or mental projected authority, or lunar authority. There's not just some somatic indicator that you can just surrender to. Nice, neat, clean, black and white, no confusion, no gray area. It's not a thing. These are processes that require interpretation. So this is why it's especially important for people with these particular inner authorities to deeply understand the nature of their mind and the formulas that it abides by, because the mind is just a set of formulas, guys. Once you go deep into that aspect of this system, it's just a set of formulas. But people with these other inner authorities, they really need to see how their mind works because their process is more connected to mind. This is a really big one here. So for anyone here with emotional authority, this is very pertinent to you. And it's the fact that the tribal ratchet wave, right, or the individual spike wave, and the collective crash wave, while they are true and they exist, they have nothing to do with your emotional authority process. The waves that Ra's talking about in this regard are real, but they're only applicable to situations in which we're in the mind and, well, triggered and or invested in a particular outcome. The ratchet wave is when the tribal person feels transgressed. Somehow they're being treated unfairly or not feeling supported. So the wave dials up, ratchets up each time the person feels triggered, right? Oh, they didn't take out the trash again. I'm going to bite my tongue. Why? Tribal person wants to bite their tongue to maintain the relationship. You're in my tribe. Happened again. I'm going to bite my tongue. Third time they blow, right? Third time they blow, and the other person can really be taken off guard because it can be over something mundane. Like, again, who's been taking out the trash? So the person with the ratchet wave, if they believe that it's unfair, that they always take out the trash, after a few incidents, they'll emotionally blow up at the other. But the trigger here is perceived lack of fairness. And here's the thing, without that belief, without that perception, there is no ratchet wave. But there is still a wave process that the tribal person goes through in order to find clarity. But that process is amorphous. It can't be systematized. It looks different per decision. The structure of that wave is not a ratchet. So ratcheting only occurs when the tribal person perceives unfairness over time. Similarly, for the collective crash wave, this is a person whose excitement for the experience builds and builds. For what? From expectation, from what they think they're going to get to experience. Where is it all going to lead? They're chasing a carrot. And then when that doesn't happen, they crash. That's the crash wave. And it's not a part of their clarity process. I'm not saying you can't learn from it, but it's not a part of the emotional clarity process. It's not like every wave experience is a crash wave. No, it's only a crash wave when expectations are involved and driving the process. Otherwise, again, the person with collective emotional definition has an amorphous wave process which can't be systematized. It looks different per decision. For anyone who just came in, please mute, and we'll have time for questions in a moment. Finally, we come to the individual spike wave, which is actually not a wave at all. Right from the very beginning, very first wave cartography that was ever written, it's called a spike and lock mechanism. And I've really proven this out in my client work. I see the spike and lock mechanism. It goes up and down. And when it goes up and down, it can lock into place for a sustained period. Or it can go up and back down again very quickly. People with individual emotional definition can go from happy to sad to happy again in 10 minutes, or then get stuck for a while. Regardless, the movement that spikes up or spikes down is driven by a feeling of empowerment or disempowerment. When empowered, the mood spikes up, and it can get stuck there to the extent that the thoughts affirm a feeling of empowerment. Everyone can please mute. Can everyone please mute? I'm going to just do it myself here. So it goes up and down, and when it goes up and down, it can lock into a place for a sustained period, right? Or it can go up and then back down again very quickly. But again, regardless, the movement that spikes up or spikes down is driven by a feeling of empowerment or disempowerment. And again, when empowered, the mood spikes up and gets stuck there to the extent that the thoughts reinforce a feeling of empowerment. Or when disempowered, the mood spikes down and it gets stuck there to the extent that the thoughts affirm a feeling of disempowerment. But in its pure nature, it goes up and down. The drama of it and the locking in place has to do with thoughts interfering with the process. In this case, beliefs around empowerment or disempowerment. Empowerment in romance, right? Or disempowerment in romance. Empowerment in creativity, or disempowerment in the absence of creativity, in a fallow period where you wonder, am I ever going to be creative again? Empowerment in finding the spirit with others, or disempowerment when not. So this is a really simple distinction that's really vital for emotional people to understand that unfortunately was not explained to me as an emotional person. So we're going to have a little pause here. We've got a few more slides to go through. We'll probably go over the hour, but are there any questions or comments about anything that we've talked about so far?
Tanya has a question in the chat while we're
Okay.
still kind of in the emotional wave. She asks, why do I have a crash wave but feel like all the waves occur just seems collectively human?
Why do I have a crash wave? I don't understand the second part of the sentence.
She has the 3041.
Okay. So what was the second part of the question?
But I feel like all of the waves occur. So she's saying she experiences all of the waves that you're talking about. Is that correct, Sonia?
Yeah. Hmm.
Well, if you have hanging gates there as people come through your life and as transits occur, you're going to have those happening. Do you have hanging gates in your solar plexus?
I think I have just one. Let me just double check.
I don't want to get too deep in the weeds with specifics, but the gist of it is that you're generally designed just for the crash wave, or you're generally designed for a wave process. And when led by expectations, you're going to crash, right? But my
Hmm.
important point here is you don't need to crash to get to your truth. You don't need to go on that ride. That ride only occurs when you've told yourself about what you're going to get, right?
Yeah, that makes
Otherwise, the
sense.
actual wave process is amorphous, and you have to just see, hey, some decisions I always am high about them. I'm always a yes. Some decisions, never. Some go up and down, right? And you have to get very familiar with, the emotional. The solar plexus authority is occurring in your physical solar plexus up to your mid chest primarily. It's to get very familiar with the sensation happening here. Imaging shows that emotions do affect the entire body, but the crux of where you need to pay attention is your physical solar plexus to your mid chest. And you tune into the question that you're grappling with throughout the day. And you do need to consider different things. Okay, I was invited to be a founder of this company. How do I feel about that person? Do I trust them? Do I feel fairly compensated? Feel into these questions and see where you land, because clarity is on the other side of the wave. Clarity is on the other side of the motor. You got to let the energy in that center burn out, and then you see where you've landed, right? So,
And I'm someone who has two individual waves. I also have the 659, so I experience a little bit of all of them. But I've really been tracking this for a bit to notice how my thoughts of disempowerment will keep me in a low or kind of get me stuck in that feeling of down and it like all this drama in my mind. Whereas if I'm not having all that drama in my mind, I'm not experiencing that in the same way. Like James is almost referring to how we experience this emotional process, but it's not going to be that intense wave mechanic if our mind isn't getting involved in, you know,
yeah.
going into the stories of disempowerment. And on the other end of it, empowerment as well. When I feel super empowered, it's like I'm high, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a really important point. And I don't think Ra ever said, you guys have to go through this to get to truth. But he just described phenomena relative to that definition, which is true. The distinction is just that it's not about finding your truth. It's just you have to realize how you get into those particular waves that he's talking about is because your mind has an input, an expectation, a belief, or whatever. And that's how you go on that ride. So, very important.
James, do you think when there's certain transits, we might all experience those different waves? Like if there is a channel active, we might have an
Yeah.
experience of that?
Yeah, we have the 3536 channel of transitoriness. It's been going on for the past few months and will be around for a bit longer. And um, actually, I don't think it's happening right now, if I remember right. But anyway, for sure, that's a collective wave that we can find ourselves during those transits, telling ourselves stories about what we want to experience, a change we want to make, and then we can get burned by that. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe I don't know if Sonia, that is the answer to what you're saying, but that could be something to consider is that just throughout your life you have experienced a lot of different transits. So
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes sense in terms of it just feeling like a collective human experience, like the
Mhm.
transits are our collective human experience.
Totally. Or if
Um,
you're around somebody that has that wave, be conditioned by it, experience it through osmosis, that too.
Mhm.
Absolutely. If I wanted to mostly just dive deep into the emotional process for myself and also for my own clients' understanding, would that be your emoting? Like, is that still something that's available? Is that a emoting program or teachings, or is there like a specific? I'm like, how can I just get the emotional part? That's what I'm having a response for right now.
That class that Teresa and I put together was postponed, so we never actually had that class. We don't know. We would like to do it. We don't know when that's going to happen. This course definitely entails more than that, but we are taking, I believe, one entire class, or at least most of one class, to go very, very deep into the emotional authority. But yeah, but if you're only interested in that, this class is a lot of other things. So yeah, thanks. Okay, any other questions before we move on? Anything?
Just one question. Where
Yeah.
I am non-emotional, I only have one hanging gate in my solar plexus. The waves that I'm experiencing can still be, depending on which channels, one of those three types of wave. Would that be correct?
Which
In
gate
all
do you have in your solar plexus?
six.
So six has all waves. It's the source of all of the
That's
different
yeah.
waves. So
Yeah.
you will learn in the course of your life. You're here to actually develop wisdom about all of those different types of wave processes. Yeah. And particularly about how to sustain, how to hang in on the difficult conversations so that you can grow from those difficult conversations rather than running away, acquiescing, and so on, right? Really important is to be able to face the truth, have the difficult conversation. Otherwise, you're inhibiting your growth and development because gate 6 is conflict and intimacy, but it's conflict for growth and development, not just destructive conflict, not just drama, right? So, yeah. Okay.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Teresa,
Before,
shall we move on or is there another question?
I was just going to say before we move on, I just had a couple things to expand on.
Oh,
Because I know that we
let
talk
me get
about,
back to Chinese,
oh,
just to say.
Oops. Can everyone mute? Here, I'm gonna mute
it was
everyone.
Joe, if you want to.
Okay.
I wanted to expand a little bit on the phrase nervous system regulation because I feel like it's a huge buzzword right now, or buzz phrase. And James expanded a lot on this in a way, but I want to just put a bullet point here that nervous system regulation doesn't mean calm. And so that's kind of what we're going to end up going through in class is learning what does regulation mean to you, and more so learning how regulation actually just means nervous system flexibility so that you can have these different states available to you. At some points, regulation might be to run, right? It might be to fight. We have all of those capabilities. And so when we get stuck in a certain trauma loop and we get locked into a way of, it's like our body thinks it's regulating itself, but it's really not. That's what we want to start being aware of and see, oh, my nervous system actually does have flexibility. There's other options the more I tune into it and the more I'm aware of it, but it absolutely does not mean calm. And that was something I thought for the longest time. So every time people said it, I'm like, oh, I'm not calm, so I'm not regulated. Regulation can look so different for everybody. And I also want to say that the human design experiment in and of itself can bring up trauma. That's also
Mhm.
part of the cool thing about it, I guess, is like it really shows us who we are in all these different scenarios. And we'll talk about this later, but even the act of waiting, that brings up different things in different nervous systems for people. And so I'm really trying to promote curiosity and awareness within the nervous system and not saying it needs to look like this for everybody or whatever our mind thinks that nervous system regulation looks like. That's an exploratory process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Teresa. Really important point. Yeah. Okay, let's move on for time's sake. There'll be some additional time for questions. Okay, and this is something that I'd like for you to expand on as well, Teresa, but there's something almost universally said in the experiment where people say, well, my body did that, or my body didn't do that. And while that makes sense, and I think that you'll have this experience in the experiment as well, it is accurate to some experiences, but we also need to bear in mind that the body does a lot of things based on the past and what it thinks it needs to do to protect itself, often resorting to maladaptive behaviors, right, that no longer really apply to the present moment reality. And that's really the basis of the need for the trauma work in somatics. In my own experience, I realized I wasn't just waiting. I was also checked out for a part of the experiment, waiting from what's called my transference. And if you don't know what transference is, don't worry, but it basically means I was waiting with more awareness of my mind than my present embodied experience. So I wasn't really home, so to speak, to respond and take that next leg of my journey. I was checked out. So the body's not always perfectly correct to what is needed in the present moment, but it is doing its best relative to your trauma history and conditioning to protect you. And that's the thing. Above all else, your body's going to protect you. But that can come at the cost of fulfillment, right? Because each archetype has a signature, right? When we're on track. And so our signature of satisfaction for generators and peace for manifestors, surprise for reflectors, and success for projectors requires us to transcend mere survival. So that's another thing that we're trying to do here. Teresa, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think when it comes to this question, I mean, this is a huge question. It's layered, it's nuanced, and exploratory for each person. But just as I've gotten deeper into somatic work, I've noticed certain tendencies I have that I've actually discovered are trauma responses. And my mind would tell me, no, you're just listening to your inner authority, when it was actually me being a people pleaser or fawning. And I had to start really clocking that for myself and noticing when my mind would jump in and say, you should do this or you should do that, or no, just wait a little longer, or don't confront, you need to ride your wave. The mind is insidious when it comes to helping us go deeper into our trauma responses, because our trauma responses are what's protected us our whole life. So we don't want to demonize them. We want to see them as, oh, cool, this is something that my body has done to protect me, to keep me safe. And with awareness, I can ask myself, is this working for me or not? Am I actually really tuning into my inner authority and following that, or am I letting these trauma responses take over?
Thanks, Teresa. Yeah, it's really important. Okay, here's a shift for the generators in the class. Too much emphasis is put on sacral sounds. So having done over 1,000 readings, I've attended several human design retreats. I've been a speaker at the High Desert Human Design Conference for 4 years in a row, where I've met over 100 people each year. Let me tell you, having met a lot of people and worked with a lot of raw students, it's blatantly clear to me that this isn't how it works. So you don't hear many sacral sounds at these gatherings. Isn't that interesting? You know where you do hear them? You hear them in contrived retreat settings where the correctness of a sacral response is a foregone conclusion and that it needs to express vocally. Right. And unfortunately, in those contrived settings, people are kind of going through the motions and playing the game, and they're trying it out. Generally, hey, I don't know. Let me see. Here I am. People are telling me this is how it works. Let me just see. But again, most of my network is in this experiment. Let me tell you, it's not universally happening. Most of the teachers that I've trained with don't actually believe this. Right. In fact, the only teachers I had that do believe this are Marianne Winiger and Leela. It's basically everyone from the Marianne Winiger camp. So everyone else has a different explanation of it. It is a real phenomena. Generators do need to wait to respond, and they get a response, right? But it's bigger than sacral sounds. Generators do make sacral sounds, right? But emotional generators, for example, cannot do that on command. Why? Because the emotional system overpowers the sacral. That's why if you have emotional definition, that's your inner authority is either emotional or emotional sacral or emotional something else, right? But the emotional system overpowers the sacral. 3420 manifesting generators, it's the only manifesting generator channel. Well, they can't do that because their response just tears them off their chair. It's faster than verbalization. And Ra emphasized this all over source material. But even people that don't fall in one of those camps about being emotional or having that manifesting generator channel still have other somatic indicators when something's correct for them. Right? So this is something that we'll explore so that you can open your eyes to the full range of how your sacral is expressing. Because let me tell you, this really tripped me up when I thought it was so narrow. And you can't just ask me a question and get an uh-huh. What does happen is if you're talking to me and I resonate with what you're saying, I'm often making these sounds. Just saying, yeah, I'm vibing with what you're saying. Right? But there are other indicators that are important to track. Anything that you want to add, Teresa?
I just want to say too, I've heard all types say uh-huh and uh-uh.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
not just unique to generators. I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's we all do have sacral, right? Even if it's not
Yes.
defined. And so I think it might be something that is the sacral, but it just drives me crazy when people are so invested in this one truth and acting like it's the one way for things. And um, yeah, it's just, I don't think that's the case. So.
Yeah. I mean, 101 human design. We all have all the gates and all the centers. We don't have all the channels because a channel requires consistency. You've got to have those gates, right? In order to have the channel. But we all have all the gates and all the centers. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to be alive. So you're right. All types do rely on their sacral to an extent, right? And as we're going to look at in a moment, right? It's just that for the life of the generator, these responses really turn the pages of their life. They enter you in a new chapter, a new situation, right? That defines your life, right? But we all have sacrals, and it's more nuanced than this, guys. I mean, this is just, I mean, it blows my mind that more people aren't talking about this because I mean, again, I know regulars who attend the conference in Santa Fe and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, how are you not noticing that the room is not filled with, It's just not. It's not a thing. Okay, wisdom. We talk about wisdom in the human design experiment about, we're here to be wise through our openness. And of course, that's true to the extent that we're not caught up in the coping strategy of those undefined and open centers. We get wisdom. We're interested in those areas of life, right? So for me, for example, I've got an undefined root, an undefined spleen. I'm interested in managing stress. That's root stuff. I'm interested in health and well-being, avoiding toxic people and situations. That's my splenic wisdom. But there's another type of wisdom, which has to do with the maturity of being in your body's chemistry with acceptance and equanimity, right? To know how to surrender to your chemistry, not be bullied by it. That's wisdom in my book. And very defined designs like Teresa and mine, which you can see on our website if you're not familiar, also have the wisdom of learning how solid in themselves are other people or who falls apart around us like a house of cards because we've got a lot of definition. Can you handle it? Can you maintain? Can you be centered in yourself around that external conditioning? So wisdom can mean many things. The defined spleen, always the authority on matters of imminent danger. So it's not uncommon to see someone with splenic definition as well as sacral or emotional, right? So if you've got sacral and splenic, and not emotional, your sacral could get a response. But if the spleen comes along and says no, and we're going to talk very deeply about how the spleen communicates somatically and in your consciousness and how to separate out the splenic information from the thought stream. Very important for splenic people. What's thought versus what's intuition, instinct, or what we could call taste discernment, right? And guess what? Just because you get a response into something, that's just your sacral, which has no awareness saying, hey, I got energy in the bank. I can fuel this thing. Let's go. But the spleen can come along and say danger, and it vetoes the whole thing. Right? When the spleen speaks, it's important to listen. It's always communicating about the health and safety of your life, as well as potentially the tribe or the collective, depending upon how your spleen is defined. PHS, as we talked about before, this primary health system, it's really more than your dietary regimen. It's really a part of your guidance system. That's why we want to teach it up front. We can extrapolate more insight from PHS. And I see PHS as a form of trauma release. And what it's doing is it's doing this subtle work in the background. When you give your PHS is about nourishing your brain properly, right? Taking in the right life experiences, information the right way, nourishing your brain with the right nutritional conditions, we might say, or environmental conditions. But once you have that in place, it's subtly working in the background and it's excavating your not self. So as you take it on, your mind can start screaming more loudly, which is why I often recommend people get a not self reading shortly after or around the same time as their PHS reading. So they're prepared for what's coming. All right. So they can be ready for those mental stories, see them for what they are, right? And take them in personally. And what I hear from clients who have been in their PHS experiment for a year or more is that now they can tune into their inner authority much more consistently and clearly. It facilitates interoception, that ability to tap in and read what's going on in my body right now. And for some designs, it can really correct health issues. And for some designs, that's less the case. But regardless, PHS is more than just how you eat food. It's how you learn and how you take in life. So we want to extrapolate all of the implications of that. So you can see, are the people in your life consistent with your PHS? Is your job? Is the way that you spend your days? So it's really helpful to start to track that, as it's another important signpost for living correctly. For example, you got a first color PHS, alternating or consecutive, one thing at a time. If you do more than one thing at a time, you're going to stress yourself. Alternating people can have a lot of different projects in place simultaneously, but they take a bite of one project and then they take a bite of another project. It's still one thing at a time. They just have more movement between them, right? I'm a low sound person. Some people or situations are just too loud for me. And it's not just about decibels. There's more subtle ways to look at that too. Some movies are too loud for me. Some books are too loud for me. Too overt. I like subdued. I like subtle. I like understated. I connect that with my PHS. So there's a lot to extrapolate here. Very important. This is a really big one. When we think passenger consciousness looks like something and that we can achieve it, well, we miss it entirely. Because all the mind can do is come up with a concept about what surrender and passenger consciousness looks like. And usually it's some approximate version of sitting on the couch doing nothing, right? Until you imagine life is going to snatch you into action. That's not actually how it works. A surrendered life is still a full and active life. So you can't just from a camera view see who has a surrendered life, right? You can't see that from the outside, but there's a different frequency to it. So being checked out and apathetic has an aroma, right? Whereas passenger consciousness is a place people are coming from. It's like the concept of wu wei, right? Doing without doing. So it's a different experience entirely. But a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people in this experiment basically paint themselves into a dark corner because their mind has insidiously led them into trying to fulfill some picture of what it looks like to be surrendered. And it isn't passivity. It isn't passivity. It's about we're here to be engaged. We're here to be embodied. We're here to be present. We're here to be involved. We're here to fulfill something, right? So you can have an incredibly active life coming from a place of surrender, which means you're surrendering to your body's intelligence and not your mental agendas, right? Subtle but important. Here's a really important one. This will be the last one for today. Strategy isn't meant for the day-to-day minutia. I can't tell you how many projectors in particular I've met that weren't doing basic things like making a meal unless they were invited into it. It's not what it's about, guys, right? It's not what it's about. So for the projector in particular, they're really only here to wait for the invitation to get into some sort of a relationship, right? Whether it's platonic or romantic, or where are they living? What's their living situation? Or what are they doing professionally, right? And then, so strategy is really unlocking the macro situation for all types. What am I doing with my life? How am I spending my days? What do I do for money? Where do I live? Who's close to me? It unlocks that aspect of it. Within those parameters, you're relying on your PHS and your cognition and other bodily input, right? If you think that strategy applies at the minutia, you know what's going to happen? You're going to tie yourself up. You're going to get hamstrung. Your life is going to become disempowered, right? Rather than empowered, right? So you have to understand where these things apply. What are the conditions by which they apply? And then it's liberating, right? It's liberating and empowering versus the opposite. So any questions or comments? And Teresa, if you have anything to share about any of these points, please jump in. So this is where we'll wrap up for today, everyone. Any questions in the chat or any questions to you, Teresa?
No,
Okay.
I guess everything was pretty straightforward.
I can't imagine, but maybe it is. Any questions about the course format, what we're going to be covering, anything like that? The syllabus that you can download on the webpage is there. I think it's pretty clear, pretty comprehensive. We go through the topics for each class, both on the human design side, which I'm leading, and on the somatic side, which Teresa is leading. I think it's 14 classes in total. I want to say 9 human design classes and 5 somatic support sessions. And it's going to be comprehensive, PHS, cognition, strategy and authority, common misunderstandings, what 7-centeredness versus 9-centeredness. You're going to have all of the essential stuff that can really empower your experiment up front. Or even if you're deep in the experiment, you want to kind of go back to these topics and anchor in them more. And Teresa's going to take it to the next level with what she's offering somatically.
Yeah, we're going to go into basic nervous system, just an understanding of the nervous system at a very basic level, and trauma, and going into practices that have been really helpful for me and for my clients, just starting to unpack what embodying your design actually looks like. And it's, I see somatics as a non-negotiable at this point. So
Yeah. Yeah. With my therapist friends, it's at a point because, one of my good friends who focuses on EMDR, which is a very well-researched form of trauma therapy. And she'll go to some continuing education classes where therapists just have the cognitive behavioral background and they're just like wide-eyed and like blown away, like, wow, well, how do you work with someone's body? And she's like, what are you even doing if you're not working with someone's body? Like the era of just pure cognitive intellectual therapy is over. It's passe. It has some value, but it has limited value. I mean,
yeah.
one of the teachers that Teresa and I follow, who's really brilliant with somatics, he was in cognitive behavioral therapy for 20 years before he discovered somatics and resolved his trauma. It's
Mhm.
just never ending.
Yeah, listen, my dad's a PhD in psychology, he's a clinical psychologist, and I was teaching him about trauma a couple of years ago. The man is 78 years old. He's been a psychologist for 40 something years and didn't know the basics on trauma. So, I mean, he's very open and he's learned a lot in the last couple of years, but it just blows my mind how someone could be that advanced in that field and not even be considering the body and how it plays into it. So,
Or it's like medical doctors not have any training. At least in the US, they get 2 hours of training in nutrition. You can be a doctor and have 2 hours of training in nutrition. Isn't that unbelievable? So it's an upside down world, guys, if you haven't noticed. Especially, I mean, it's so obviously an upside down world now. I mean, 10 years ago, maybe you could not believe that, but like post pandemic, I mean, I think everyone knows, wow, times are changing. Things are different. Things are coming to a head, you know?
mhm.
So, yeah. Okay. Anything else before we wrap up? Well, thank you all for attending. It was great to be with you. It's great to see some of these faces from analyst training and from the retreat. And hi, Ella. Good to see you on camera. Yeah. And just follow up with Teresa or I if you have any questions about the program. DM us, email us, anything like that. We're happy to help. And we'll be sending this to you somehow or another. Teresa and I'll figure that out, but we'll give you a copy of this class as well if you want to reflect further. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you both very much.
Yeah,
You're
thanks everyone
welcome.
for
Thank you,
coming.
Sarah Jane.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're
Been really
welcome, Ella.
insightful. I'll be in touch about the course.
Great. Okay. Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.